They called her Miriam, just another slave woman, bent and broken by years in the fields. But one morning, she was forced to stand helpless as her children, Benjamin and Esther, were sold like cattle to the cruel Darnells. Her screams were silenced by Overseer Grady's whip, but inside, something snapped. By night, she crept through swamps, watching, waiting, whispering to her children through the bars of a cage. She learned the Darnells planned to use little Esther for breeding. That was the moment Mercy died. With fire in her hands and an axe in her grip, Miriam slaughtered the masters in their own bed, tore open the cage, and dragged her children into the night. Now, the most wanted woman in the South flees with blood on her hands, and her children clinging to her side. The question is, can Miriam truly save them from the hunters closing in? Or will freedom demand even more blood? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The rising sun painted the cotton fields in shades of gold, but Miriam felt none of its warmth. Her fingers moved mechanically through the cotton bolls, plucking the white fiber while keeping watch over Benjamin and Esther working nearby. The children's small hands darted between the plants like tired butterflies. "Faster," Miriam whispered to them, noting how the sun climbed higher. "Master gets angry when we're slow." Her words carried the weight of experience. Benjamin nodded, his young face already showing the seriousness of someone much older. He reached deeper into the cotton plants, ignoring the scratches from the sharp bolls. Beside him, little Esther struggled to keep up, her tiny fingers clumsy with exhaustion. The thunder of hooves made Miriam's heart skip. Overseer Grady appeared on his horse, his shadow falling across their row. The horse's hooves crushed some cotton plants, but Grady didn't care about waste when he had power to display. "All of you," he shouted, his voice cutting through the morning air. "To the main yard, now!" Miriam's stomach turned to ice. Main yard gatherings never meant anything good. She reached for her children, pulling them close as they walked. Other slaves emerged from between the rows, heads down, feet shuffling through the morning dew. The main yard stretched out before the big house, the packed dirt already hot under their feet. Mrs. Darnell stood on the porch, her fine dress a mockery of their sweat-stained rags. Beside her was a man Miriam didn't recognize, but his fancy suit and cruel smile told her everything she needed to know. A slave trader. "Line up!" Grady barked, cracking his whip above their heads. "Children in front!" Miriam's grip on Benjamin and Esther tightened. Benjamin tried to stand tall, but Esther pressed her face into Miriam's skirts. "Mama," Esther whimpered, "I'm scared." "Hush now," Miriam soothed, though her own heart was racing. "Stand straight, eyes down." The slave trader walked down the line, examining them like cattle. He stopped before Benjamin, grabbing the boy's chin and turning his face side to side. "Strong boy. Good teeth. He'll fetch a fine price." Miriam's world began to spin. Price. The word echoed in her head like a death knell. The trader moved to Esther next, pinching her arm. "Girl's a bit small, but she'll grow. Good breeding stock in a few years." "No," Miriam whispered, then louder. "No!" Grady's whip cracked across her back. "Quiet!" But Miriam couldn't be quiet. Not now. "Please! They're my children! Please don't take them!" Another crack of the whip. Fire bloomed across her shoulders. Through tears, she saw Mrs. Darnell watch with cold satisfaction from the porch. "500 for the pair," Mrs. Darnell said, her voice carrying across the yard. "Our plantation needs young blood." "Mama!" Benjamin tried to run to her, but rough hands grabbed him. Esther's screams pierced the morning air. Miriam lunged forward, but Grady's whip wrapped around her throat. She clawed at it, gasping, as her children were dragged toward a waiting cart. "Mama, help us!" Benjamin's voice cracked with terror. "Please," Miriam choked out. "I'll work harder. I'll do anything." The whip tightened. Spots danced before her eyes. She saw Esther reaching for her with tiny hands, Benjamin fighting against the men holding him. Their tears, their fear, their faces burned into her mind as consciousness slipped away. When she came to, the yard was empty. The cart was gone. Her children were gone. The day passed in a blur of cotton and pain. Every movement pulled at the wounds on her back, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache in her chest. She worked mechanically, her mind replaying every moment with her children. Benjamin's first steps, Esther's laugh, the way they'd curl up against her at night, their small bodies warm and trusting. Now they were gone, sold to the Darnells. She'd heard whispers about that plantation, about children who disappeared, about the cruel games Mrs. Darnell played with her property. As darkness fell, Miriam sat alone by the fire pit outside the slave quarters. The flames danced before her, but she saw only her children's faces, heard only their screams. The fire cast shadows that seemed to reach for her like Benjamin's desperate hands. "My babies," she whispered to the flames. "My precious babies." The fire crackled, sparks rising into the night sky like the tears she could no longer shed. She remembered Benjamin's voice just yesterday, telling her about the birds he'd seen, remembered Esther's small fingers braiding her hair this morning. Now they were alone, scared, probably huddled together in some strange place. The flames blurred before her eyes. In their dance, she saw Benjamin's serious face, trying so hard to be brave. Saw Esther's gentle smile, now twisted in terror. The fire held no warmth for her, just as the world held no mercy. Other slaves moved around the quarters, some casting sympathetic glances her way, but none dared approach. They knew the pain of separation, knew there were no words to ease this kind of wound. Miriam stared deeper into the flames, letting them burn away her tears, her fear, her weakness. In their depths, she heard her children calling for her, heard their voices rising like the sparks into the dark sky, calling her, needing her. The fire pit cast its glow across her face, shadows dancing across features now still as stone. She sat motionless, lost in the flames and the echoes of her children's voices in her mind. Dawn crept across the fields like a tired ghost. Miriam's hands moved through the cotton plants without thought or feeling, her motions as empty as her eyes. The lash marks on her back burned with each bend and stretch, but the pain felt distant, unreal compared to the void where her children should be. "Well, look who's back to work." Overseer Grady's voice dripped with cruel amusement as he rode past on his horse. "Missing something today, ain't you?" Miriam kept her head down, fingers mechanically plucking cotton. "Don't react. Don't give him the satisfaction." "Such a shame about those young ones," Grady continued, circling his horse around her. "But that's what happens when you breed good stock. They get sold off." He laughed, the sound like stones rattling in a tin cup. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she forced them steady. "Let him think he's broken you. Let him believe your spirit is crushed." "Nothing to say?" Grady leaned down from his saddle. "Yesterday you couldn't shut your mouth. Found your place now, haven't you?" Miriam dropped her gaze lower, shoulders slumping in apparent defeat. Inside, her mind was sharp as a blade, recording every word, every gesture of mockery, storing them away like fuel for a fire. The overseer finally tired of his game and rode off to torment others. Miriam continued working, moving down the rows with mechanical precision. Other slaves gave her wide berth, their own fears of separation too raw to risk sharing her pain. As the morning wore on, she found herself near old Isaiah, who worked slowly due to his twisted leg. He was always assigned the worst rows, the ones closest to the swamp, where the cotton grew thin and the mud sucked at your feet. "Child," he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the rustle of cotton leaves, I heard about your little ones." Miriam said nothing, but shifted slightly closer as she worked. "The Darnell plantation," Isaiah continued, his gnarled hands never stopping their motion. "I know the way there. Through the river paths." Her fingers stilled for just a moment. Isaiah had been on these lands longer than anyone. Some said he'd tried running once, long ago, but his leg had been broken in the chase. "What good does knowing do me?" Miriam whispered back, her voice rough from disuse. "Knowledge is power," Isaiah replied. "Even for folks like us." He paused, glancing around. "I got something might help. But nothing comes free." Miriam understood. Even small kindnesses had to be traded here. She reached into her pocket, touching the carved wooden bead she'd made for Esther's birthday. She'd been saving it, hoping to give it to her daughter soon. Now it burned against her fingers like a broken promise. "I have a bead," she murmured. "Carved it myself." Isaiah nodded slightly. "Meet me by the tool shed when the sun touches the cypress trees. Bring the bead." They worked in silence after that, maintaining careful distance. Miriam watched the sun's slow crawl across the sky, counting the minutes until it aligned with the massive cypress trees that marked the edge of the plantation. When the time came, she made her way to the tool shed, moving casually as if headed to return her picking sack. Isaiah was already there, pretending to sort through broken tools. "The bead," he whispered. Miriam pressed it into his palm. His fingers closed around it, and he slipped something back to her. A small piece of rough cloth. "River map," he breathed. "Shows the way through the swamps. The Darnell place sits where two streams meet. Follow the water. You'll find it." She tucked the cloth into her dress, next to her skin. It felt warm there, like a secret flame. "Thank you," she whispered. Isaiah's eyes met hers, deep and knowing. "Just remember, child, sometimes the best path ain't the straight one. Water knows where to flow." He shuffled away, leaving Miriam alone with her precious map, and the weight of possibility pressing against her ribs. The rest of the day passed in a haze of cotton and sweat. Miriam kept her head down, her movements slow and defeated. Every time Grady passed, she made herself smaller, more broken. Let him think he's won. Let him think you're finished. As darkness fell, she lay on her thin pallet in the slave quarters, other bodies breathing softly around her. In the dark, she carefully pulled out the cloth map, running her fingers over its crude lines. Isaiah had marked the rivers with rough stitches, the plantations with tiny knots. She traced the path again and again until she could see it behind her closed eyes. The distance seemed impossible in daylight, but in the dark, with her children's faces burning in her mind, nothing felt beyond reach. "Benjamin," she whispered, so quietly even she could barely hear. "Esther." Their names were a prayer, a promise, a curse against those who'd taken them. She pictured Benjamin trying to be brave, looking after his sister, saw Esther's tears, her confusion, her fear. The images drove daggers through her heart, but she welcomed the pain. Pain meant she wasn't broken. Pain meant she could still fight. The map pressed against her palm like a lifeline. She imagined the rivers it showed, flowing endlessly through the dark. Somewhere along those waters, her children were sleeping, or lying awake like her, wondering if their mama had forgotten them. "Benjamin," she breathed again. "Esther." The names filled the darkness, echoing in her mind like stones dropped in deep water. She clutched the map tighter, its rough edges grounding her in reality, while her heart reached across the miles toward her stolen children. Around her, the slave quarters creaked and settled, its familiar sounds a reminder of the cage she needed to escape. But now she had a key, a crude map stitched by gnarled fingers that remembered freedom's paths. The moon hung low and bloated in the sky as Miriam slipped from her pallet. Her heart thundered so loudly she feared others would hear it. She'd waited until the deepest part of night, when even the crickets seemed to doze. Her bundle was small, dried corn pocketed from her meals, a handful of withered berries found during picking, and a strip of cloth torn from her skirt. The map lay against her chest, its rough surface now as familiar as her own skin. The night air clung to her like a damp shroud as she crept between the slave quarters. Every shadow seemed alive with threats. A dog barked in the distance, making her freeze, but the sound didn't come closer. Miriam kept low, using the techniques she'd learned from years of avoiding overseer attention. Roll your feet from heel to toe. Test each step before putting your weight down. Move like water through grass. The river called to her with its midnight music, soft splashes and gurgles that helped mask her movement. Isaiah's map showed the way clearly. Follow the water's edge north until it bent east. Then cross at the shallow parts he'd marked with tiny crosses. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness. Miriam dropped to her belly, pressing herself into the earth. Lantern light swept the trees ahead, the night patrol. Their voices carried across the still air. Thought I heard something over here? Probably just a possum. Ain't nobody fool enough to run in gator season. The light swung closer. Miriam held her breath, willing herself to become part of the ground. The patrol passed within 10 feet of her hiding spot, their boots squelching in the mud. Let's check the north fence. Bradley swears he saw tracks there yesterday. Their voices faded, but Miriam waited until the lantern was a distant firefly before moving again. Her dress was soaked with mud now, but that was good. Mud didn't reflect moonlight. The river led her past familiar landmarks turned strange by darkness. The old, lightning-struck oak, where she used to nurse Benjamin. The crossing where Esther had first learned to wash clothes. Each memory was a knife in her heart, but she used the pain to sharpen her focus. Dogs began baying in the distance, not the lazy barks of sleepy hounds, but the excited howls of hunters. Miriam's blood turned to ice. Had they discovered her missing already? She splashed into the river's edge, letting the water cover her tracks. Isaiah's words echoed in her mind. Water knows where to flow. The current pulled at her skirts as she waded through the shallows, staying close to the bank where reeds could hide her. The dogs' voices grew closer, then stopped abruptly. They'd lost her scent at the water, but she couldn't relax. Dogs weren't the only hunters out tonight. For hours, she played this deadly game of hide-and-seek. When voices approached, she submerged herself up to her neck in the river, using a reed to breathe. When lanterns swept the banks, she pressed herself into muddy hollows beneath old trees. The moon tracked across the sky, marking time's passage. Miriam's muscles burned from constant tension, her skin prickling with cold despite the summer night. But she kept moving, one careful step at a time. Just before dawn, she reached the place where two streams met. The marker Isaiah had said would show she'd found Darnell land. Here, the water ran deeper, darker. Spanish moss hung from cypress trees like gray ghosts. Miriam crouched in thick swamp grass, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Ahead, through gaps in the trees, she could see the warm glow of lanterns from the big house. The Darnell plantation spread before her. Neat rows of cotton fields leading up to the mansion, slave quarters squatting in its shadow like dark mushrooms. Somewhere in those buildings, Benjamin and Esther were sleeping, or maybe they were awake, crying for her in the dark. The thought sent such a surge of rage through her body that she had to bite her lip to keep from screaming. She studied the layout, marking escape routes and hiding spots. The slave quarters were closer to the swamp than at her old plantation. That could be useful. But the dog pens were closer too, their inhabitants pacing restlessly even at this late hour. A night bird called somewhere behind her, making her jump. The sky was beginning to lighten at the edges. She'd have to wait until the next night to get closer. Moving now would be suicide. Miriam settled deeper into the swamp grass, ignoring the insects that crawled across her skin. She'd become a creature of mud and shadow, a ghost in the reeds. The bundle of food remained untouched at her side. Her stomach was too knotted with fear and anticipation to eat. The big house's windows glowed like cat's eyes in the dark. She imagined the Darnells sleeping peacefully in their fine beds, never thinking twice about the lives they'd torn apart. The thought made her fingers dig into the mud until they found roots to grip. A soft breeze carried fragments of sound from the slave quarters. A baby's cry quickly hushed. The creak of old wood. She strained her ears, trying to catch any hint of her children's voices. But the wind shifted, taking the sounds away. Dawn was coming. Soon the overseers would wake, the dogs would be fed, and the day's work would begin. Miriam remained motionless in her hiding spot, watching the plantation come to life with the eyes of a hunter studying its prey. She was no longer just a mother searching for her children. She had become something else during her night journey through the swamp, something patient and dangerous, willing to wait in the mud as long as necessary to reclaim what was hers. Dawn crept across the sky in pale fingers as Miriam inched closer to the slave quarters. Her mud-caked dress helped her blend with the shadows that still clung to the ground. The morning air carried voices, field hands being roused for another day of endless labor. From her hiding spot behind a stack of split wood, she studied the layout. The quarters were arranged in two rough rows, with a muddy path running between them. Near the end, something made her blood freeze. A crude cage built from old wagon wheels and iron bars. Inside, huddled together on dirty straw, were Benjamin and Esther. Miriam's hands trembled against the wood. Her children looked smaller somehow, more fragile. Benjamin sat with his arm around his sister, his young face set in a determination that made Miriam's heart ache. Esther's head rested against her brother's shoulder, her eyes red from crying. They wore different clothes now, rough garments that hung loose on their thin frames. A purple bruise marked Benjamin's cheek. The sight made Miriam's vision blur with rage, but she forced herself to stay still as an overseer walked past, cracking his whip to hurry the other slaves to work. When the path cleared, Miriam crept forward, keeping low. The cage was meant for holding hunting dogs, barely tall enough for the children to stand. She pressed herself against its back, where shadows were deepest. "Benjamin," she whispered. "Esther." They both startled. Benjamin's eyes went wide as he turned, while Esther let out a tiny gasp. "Mama!" Benjamin's voice was barely audible. "Is it really you?" "I'm here, my loves." Miriam reached through the bars, and their small hands found hers. The touch nearly broke her composure. "I'm here." Esther began to cry, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "Mama, I want to go home." "Shh," Miriam soothed, squeezing their fingers. "You must be quiet, little one. I'm going to get you out of here, but you have to be brave for me, both of you." Benjamin nodded, his jaw set. Even at 8, he tried so hard to be strong. "When?" he whispered. "Tonight?" "Not yet. Soon." The words tasted bitter. "I need to find a way past the dogs first, but I promise I'll come back." "No!" Benjamin's voice rose slightly before he caught himself. "Please don't leave us again. We'll be quiet. We can run fast." Miriam's heart shattered at the desperation in his voice. "My brave boy. I have to plan carefully. If we're caught—" She couldn't finish the thought. "Just a little longer." "Can you be strong for Esther?" Benjamin's shoulders slumped, but he nodded. Esther pressed closer to the bars, her small face streaked with tears. "The new missus is mean," she whispered. "She pulled my hair when I spilled the water." Rage flared in Miriam's chest, but she kept her voice gentle. "Did she hurt you anywhere else?" "No, but—" Esther's words cut off as footsteps approached. Miriam pressed herself flat against the ground behind the cage. "Those two better be ready for work," a man's voice drawled. "Margaret wants the girl up at the house today." "The boy's got spirit," another voice replied. "An overseer. Had to teach him some manners yesterday. But the girl's soft. Might need breaking early. My wife has plans for that one. Good breeding stock. Once she's old enough." "Her mama was a strong one. It runs in the blood." Miriam's fingers dug into the earth as she recognized Mr. Darnell's voice, each word hammered into her like nails, transforming her fear into something darker, harder. "Bit young yet," the overseer said. 4, maybe 5 years. Margaret knows what she's doing. Says the quiet ones make the best breeders. Less fight in them." Their voices faded as they moved away. Miriam stayed frozen, letting the rage build inside her until it filled every space where fear had lived. "Mama?" Benjamin's whisper pulled her back. "Are you still there?" She forced herself to move, to reach for their hands one last time. "Listen to me," she breathed. "Whatever they tell you to do, do it. Don't fight. Don't run. Just wait for me. But the missus, I know, sweet girl. But your mama's going to fix everything. You'll see." Movement near the big house caught her eye. Slaves gathering for morning work assignments. She had to go. "I love you both so much," she whispered. "Remember that. Remember I'm coming back." Their fingers clutched at hers, not wanting to let go. But Miriam made herself pull away, crawling backward into the shadows. Benjamin's face was a mask of quiet despair. Esther pressed her face against the bars, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Miriam retreated to the woodpile, then the edge of the swamp. Each step felt like tearing her own flesh, but the rage helped her move, helped her think past the pain. She watched throughout the day from various hiding spots, studying the plantation's rhythms. The dog pens were checked 3 times. Guards changed at noon and dusk. The Darnells took their meals by the windows, visible through gauzy curtains. As the sun began to set, Miriam's hand found a stone in the mud, sharp-edged and heavy. She gripped it until her palm bled, letting the pain feed her fury. The Darnells' dinner conversation drifted from their open window, filled with casual cruelty. They spoke of her children like livestock, planning their futures with the same consideration they'd give to breeding horses. In the growing darkness, Miriam pressed the bloody stone to her lips like a promise. She would return, yes, but not just to rescue her children. The Darnells had bought 2 slaves at auction, but they'd purchased their own deaths. Midnight draped the plantation in velvet darkness. Miriam moved like a shadow between patches of moonlight, her feet silent on the packed earth. The stone she'd held all day was now tucked into her dress, replaced by a small clay jar of lamp oil she'd stolen from the quarters. The barn loomed ahead, weathered wood silvered by starlight. Inside, the livestock shifted restlessly as she eased the door open. The smell of hay and manure filled her nostrils. Miriam worked quickly, methodically, scattering loose hay in long trails across the wooden floor. She uncorked the oil, drizzling it over the dry stalks, letting it soak into the aged boards. Her hands didn't shake. The rage that had built through the day left no room for fear. As she worked, she could hear Mrs. Darnell's voice in her mind, discussing Esther's future with such casual cruelty. The memory steadied her movements, made them precise. Near the door, mounted on the wall, hung the tools of daily labor, including a heavy wood-cutting axe. Miriam tested its weight, feeling the solid heft of it. The blade gleamed dully, recently sharpened. She tucked it through her belt. The hay trails led to the back of the barn, where the most valuable horses were stabled. These would be the first to panic, creating the most chaos. Miriam pulled the stone from her dress and struck it against a rusted nail. Sparks flew, catching in the oil-soaked hay. The fire spread faster than she expected, hungry flames racing along the trails she'd laid. Smoke began to fill the air. The horses whinnied in fear, kicking at their stalls. Miriam slipped out the door as the first shouts of alarm went up from the quarters. She pressed herself against the barn's outer wall, watching. People emerged from the slave quarters, pointing at the growing blaze. An overseer ran past, shouting for water. The flames were visible now through the barn's high windows, casting wild shadows. The commotion drew more attention. Lanterns flickered to life in the big house. Miriam counted the moving lights. 3, 4, 5. Voices called back and forth. The front door opened, spilling yellow lamplight across the yard. "Mr.?" Darnell emerged in his nightshirt, bellowing orders. His wife appeared behind him, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. They descended the porch steps, directing the growing chaos. Neither noticed the dark figure sliding through the shadows toward their unguarded door. Inside, the house was warm and still smelled of dinner. Miriam had never been past the kitchen, but she knew the layout from listening to house slaves gossip. The master bedroom would be upstairs, front of the house, with windows overlooking the yard. She climbed the stairs silently, axe in hand. The polished wood felt foreign under her bare feet after so many years of dirt and splinters. A child's doll lay abandoned on one step, probably a toy Esther had been made to carry for some pampered daughter. Miriam stepped over it. The bedroom door stood open. She could hear the Darnells returning, their voices carrying up the stairs as they supervised the firefighting effort. Miriam positioned herself behind the door, axe raised, her heartbeat steady and slow. Mrs. Darnell entered first, muttering about the ruined barn. She didn't see Miriam until the axe was already swinging. The blade caught her in the back of the neck with a meaty thunk. She went down without a sound, crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. Mr. Darnell was 2 steps behind. He had time to register his wife's fallen form, time to open his mouth, but not time to shout. Miriam's second swing took him in the face. Blood sprayed across the flowered wallpaper. He staggered, trying to raise his hands. The third blow finished him. Miriam stood over their bodies, breathing hard. The axe dripped red onto the fine carpet. Outside, she could hear shouting as people fought the fire. She had minutes at most before someone came to check on the masters. Wiping the axe blade on Mrs. Darnell's shawl, Miriam hurried back downstairs and out into the night. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching for the sky. Most of the plantation's attention was focused there, leaving the path to the slave quarters clear. Benjamin and Esther's cage sat in deeper shadows now, away from the fire's glow. They were awake, pressed against the bars, watching the commotion with wide eyes. They gasped when they saw her emerge from the darkness, but stayed quiet as she'd taught them. "Stand back," Miriam whispered. The axe made short work of the cage's wooden supports. The iron bars groaned and fell. She reached in, gathering her children close for the first time in days. They clung to her, trembling. "We have to run," she told them, forcing herself to break the embrace. "Fast and quiet, like I showed you in the cotton fields. Can you do that?" Benjamin nodded. Esther's lower lip quivered, but she straightened her small shoulders. Miriam took their hands, one in each of hers, and led them toward the swamp. Behind them, the fire's roar grew louder as the barn's roof collapsed. They moved quickly through the darkness, staying low. The swamp's edge was only 50 yards away, but it felt like miles. Shouts and screams echoed from the burning barn, the air filled with the smell of smoke and burning wood. Just as they reached the first cypress trees, someone near the big house screamed. A different kind of scream. They'd found the bodies. Miriam hurried her children deeper into the swamp, away from the light and noise. The mud sucked at their feet, but they kept moving. The cypress trees closed around them like protective arms. Overhead, Spanish moss swayed in the hot wind from the fire. Miriam could still see its glow through the trees, painting the low-hanging fog with hellish colors. The screaming continued, but grew fainter as they pushed deeper into the darkness. The swamp air grew heavy with pre-dawn mist. Miriam led her children through tangles of reeds and cypress knees, each step carefully placed to avoid the deeper mud holes. The night's horrors had left them exhausted, but they couldn't stop. Not with the glow of torches still visible through the trees behind them. Esther stumbled, her small feet raw from hours of walking barefoot. Benjamin, though tired himself, wrapped an arm around his sister's waist to help her along. His face was set in a determined expression that made him look older than his 8 years. "Mama," Esther whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't feel my toes anymore." Miriam stopped to check her daughter's feet. The mud had hidden cuts and scratches, but in the growing light she could see blood mixed with the muck. She tore a strip from her already ragged dress and wrapped Esther's feet as best she could. "Just a little further, baby," she murmured, though she had no real destination in mind beyond away. "Benjamin, you're being so brave helping your sister. Can you keep holding her up?" He nodded solemnly. "Yes, Mama. I'm strong enough." A dog's bark cut through the morning air, closer than before. Miriam's head snapped up, scanning the misty trees. More barks joined the first. The search parties were spreading out into the swamp. "This way," she hissed, pulling her children toward a massive cypress. Its trunk was hollowed at the base, creating a small cave draped with Spanish moss. She helped them crawl inside, then gathered more moss to cover the opening. "Don't make a sound, no matter what you hear." Through gaps in the moss curtain, they watched men with torches pass nearby. Dogs strained at their leashes, noses to the ground. Miriam held her breath when one paused, sniffing the air. But the damp swamp had masked their scent, and after a moment, the dog moved on. "They gone back to town to get more men," one searcher called to another, "offering $50 each for the children, 100 for the mother. Dead or alive? Alive for the little ones. Don't matter for her. She killed the masters in their bed." The voices faded. Miriam waited until she could no longer hear movement before pulling back the moss. The sky had lightened to pale gray, making it harder to stay hidden. They needed to move while they still had some darkness for cover. Benjamin helped Esther out of the hollow. Both children were shivering despite the humid air. Miriam reached into the small bundle she'd brought from the plantation and pulled out the heel of bread she'd saved. It was hard and slightly moldy, but it was all they had. She broke it into 3 pieces, giving the largest portions to the children. They ate quickly, hunger overcoming any complaint about the taste. Miriam forced herself to take small bites of her share, knowing she needed to keep her strength. "Listen to me," she said, as they finished the meager meal. "We have to go north. That's where free people live. It's far, many days of walking, but there are good people who will help us, if we can find them." "How will we know which way is north?" Benjamin asked. Miriam pointed to the moss growing on the tree trunks. "See how it grows thicker on one side? That's the north side. We follow that." "What about the bad men looking for us?" Esther's voice quavered. "We'll be careful. Walk quiet, like I showed you. Hide when we hear anyone coming." Miriam squeezed her daughter's hand. "I won't let them take you again. Never again." They continued through the swamp, staying in the deepest shadows. The children were getting better at moving silently, learning to test each step before putting their full weight down. Even Esther's whimpers of pain grew quieter. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Heat built under the canopy of trees, drawing out mosquitoes and biting flies. They had to stop often to slap away insects and check for snakes before stepping. Twice more they heard search parties, but each time found places to hide. Once in a tangle of roots, once beneath a fallen tree. The dogs seemed to be having trouble in the wet terrain, their barking growing more confused and distant. As the day wore on, exhaustion began to take its toll. Benjamin's steps grew clumsy, and Esther could barely keep her eyes open. Miriam knew they needed to rest, but every sound made her jump. A bird taking flight, a fish splashing, branches creaking in the hot wind. When darkness finally returned, Miriam found a cypress with thick roots creating a natural shelter. She settled the children into the space, using Spanish moss to make a soft bed. They curled together like puppies. Benjamin's arm still protectively around his sister. "Try to sleep," she told them. "I'll watch over you." "Aren't you going to rest too, Mama?" Benjamin asked through a yawn. "Later, baby. You sleep now." They were unconscious within minutes, their faces peaceful in the deepening dark. Miriam sat with her back against the cypress trunk, the bloody axe across her lap. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every distant splash made her grip the handle tighter. Stars appeared between the tree branches, but brought little light to the swamp floor. The darkness pressed close, full of unfamiliar sounds. An owl called. Something large moved through water nearby. Miriam's eyes strained to pierce the shadows, her ears alert for any hint of pursuit. She thought of the plantation, now far behind them. By now, they would have found all the bodies. The story would be spreading. The slave mother who killed her masters, the prices on their heads. They would send more men, more dogs. The swamp might hide them for a while, but they couldn't stay here forever. The night settled deeper. Miriam's body begged for sleep, but she forced herself to stay awake, watching over her sleeping children. Every sound could be a threat. Every shadow might hide danger. She had killed to free them. She would kill again to keep them free. Morning light filtered through the mist rising off the river. Miriam crouched in the dense brush along the bank, studying the far shore through gaps in the reeds. Benjamin and Esther huddled close behind her, their clothes still damp from the night's journey through the swamp. A weathered flatboat drifted into view, guided by a tall black man with graying temples. He worked the pole with practiced ease, keeping the craft steady in the current. Miriam watched him make 3 passes, each time a little closer to their hiding spot. On the 4th pass, she saw him tap his chest 3 times, the signal Isaiah had told her to watch for. Miriam's heart raced. This must be Matthias, the ferryman Isaiah had mentioned. Still, she hesitated. A lifetime of caution made her wary of any stranger, even one who might help them. "Stay hidden until I'm sure," she whispered to the children. Benjamin nodded, pulling Esther deeper into the brush. Miriam rose slightly, just enough to be visible to the ferryman. She returned the signal, tapping her own chest 3 times. The man's eyes found her immediately. He'd known exactly where to look. He guided his boat toward their position with subtle adjustments of the pole. "Morning, sister," he said softly, as the boat nosed into the reeds. "I hear you're seeking safer shores." "Isaiah sent me," Miriam replied, still half hidden. "He said you might help us cross." Matthias nodded. "Isaiah's a good man, but before we go further, are you the one they're calling the she-devil? The one who burned the Darnell place?" Miriam tensed, ready to grab her children and run, but Matthias raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Peace, sister. I'm not here to judge. Just need to know what kind of heat we're dealing with. Word's spreading fast, and there's a small fortune in bounty money on your heads." "They took my babies," Miriam said, her voice hard. "I did what I had to do." Matthias studied her face for a long moment, then nodded again. "That you did? Well, best we get moving then. Bounty hunters will be watching every crossing by sunset." Miriam gestured to her children. They emerged cautiously, staying close to her sides. Matthias's expression softened when he saw them. "Lord, they're just little ones," he murmured. He helped them into the boat with gentle hands, settling them in the bottom where they'd be less visible from shore. "Keep low now, children. Your mama's brought you this far. I'll help get you a bit further." The flatboat pushed off smoothly, Matthias working the pole with minimal splash. Miriam sat between her children, one hand on the axe hidden beneath her skirts. The far shore looked peaceful enough, but she'd learned that danger often wore a peaceful face. "Patrol came through about an hour ago," Matthias said quietly as they reached midstream. "Won't be back for a while, but there's others looking. Men, I don't know. Mean-looking sorts with dogs and guns. They're offering $200 total for the three of you." "Dead or alive?" Miriam asked, though she already knew the answer. "Alive for the little ones. For you." He shook his head. "They're calling you she-devil, saying you butchered them Darnells in their sleep. Some are scared to chase you. Say you've got devil magic. Others just want the money." Benjamin pressed closer to Miriam. She stroked his hair, wondering how much he remembered of that bloody night. Esther had kept her eyes closed through most of it, but Benjamin had seen more than a child should. The boat slid into the shadow of overhanging trees on the far bank. Matthias guided them to a small landing hidden by willows. Before they disembarked, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a brass token, worn smooth by handling. "Take this," he said, pressing it into Miriam's palm. "Show it to anyone who hangs a red lantern in their window at night. They're part of the underground. They'll help you if they can. But be careful who you trust. Some claim to be friends of the railroad but will sell you back quick as blinking." Miriam tucked the token into her dress. "Thank you. We don't have anything to pay you with. Seeing these little ones to freedom is payment enough." He pointed north through the trees. "Follow the river for 2 days, keeping it on your right. Watch for lanterns in windows. Red means safety, blue means danger, white means keep walking. Help might come later. The signs will guide you." "What signs?" Benjamin asked. Matthias smiled. "Clever ones. Broken branches pointing north. Notches in trees. Stones stacked 3 high. Little things most folks wouldn't notice, but they'll show you the way. Your mama will learn to spot them." He reached under his seat and pulled out a small bundle. "Bit of bread and dried meat. Wish I could give more. Now go on. I need to be back across before anyone notices I'm gone." They climbed carefully onto the bank. Matthias pushed off, his boat merging with the morning mist. Just before he disappeared, he called softly, "God go with you, sister. Show them devils what a mother's love can do." Miriam led her children into the trees, following the course Matthias had indicated. The brass token felt warm against her skin, a small weight carrying the promise of hope. They walked through the day, resting when needed, but always pushing north. As evening approached, they came upon a small farmhouse set back from the road. A lantern hung from the porch. Miriam counted its position carefully. 3 boards up from the floor, 2 boards in from the corner. Isaiah had told her this pattern meant safe shelter might be found. She studied the house from the tree line, watching for any sign of deception. A woman moved behind the windows, her silhouette peaceful as she worked at what looked like cooking. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the smell of baking bread. Benjamin's stomach growled at the scent. Miriam squeezed his hand, still watching. The token pressed against her chest, offering its mute testimony. After everything they'd survived, could she risk trusting these strangers? But exhaustion pulled at her bones, and her children needed real rest. The lantern swayed gently in the evening breeze, its position a beacon of possible sanctuary. Miriam took a deep breath, gripped her children's hands, and stepped out of the shadows toward the house. Mrs. Avery opened her door before Miriam could knock. She was a thin woman, with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her plain brown dress spoke of modest means, but her smile held genuine warmth. "Come in quickly," she whispered, ushering them inside. "I've been watching for travelers since sunset." The house was small but clean, with worn furniture that spoke of comfortable use. A pot of soup simmered on the stove, filling the air with the smell of vegetables and herbs. Benjamin and Esther's eyes went wide at the sight of real food cooking in a real kitchen. "You must be hungry," Mrs. Avery said, already ladling soup into bowls. "Eat first, Then we'll talk about—" She froze at the sound of horses approaching. Moving with surprising speed, she rushed to the window and peeked through the curtain. "Patrol!" she hissed. "Quick now, this way!" She led them to what appeared to be a plain wooden wall near the back of the house. With practiced movements, she pressed a hidden catch, revealing a narrow space behind the panels. Miriam hurried the children inside, then squeezed in after them. The wall clicked shut, just as boots thumped on the porch. They huddled in the darkness, barely breathing. Esther trembled against Miriam's side. Benjamin stood very still, like he was trying to be brave. The space was tight but cleverly constructed. Small air holes had been drilled near the top, and the floor was padded with old quilts. Through the wall, they heard Mrs. Avery open the door. "Evening, gentlemen. What brings you out so late?" "Searching for runaways," a gruff voice answered. "Woman and 2 young ones. Killed their masters down south. Seen anyone suspicious?" "Just me here, as always," Mrs. Avery replied calmly. "Though I did see some tracks heading east toward the river this morning. Looked fresh." Heavy footsteps moved through the house. Miriam held her breath as they passed near the false wall. She could feel Benjamin's heart pounding where he pressed against her. "Mind if we look around, ma'am?" "Of course not. Though I'd appreciate if you'd wipe your boots. I just cleaned my floors yesterday." Miriam marveled at the widow's composure as the patrol searched the house. They checked under beds, in closets, even in the root cellar. But they never found the clever false wall, built by Mrs. Avery's late husband for exactly this purpose. Finally, the boots clomped back toward the door. "Thank you for your cooperation, ma'am. If you see anything suspicious, you know where to find us." "Of course, gentlemen. Safe travels." They waited until the horses' hoofbeats faded completely before Mrs. Avery opened the wall. "You can come out now. They won't be back tonight." The next 3 days passed in a blur of quiet comfort. Mrs. Avery fed them fresh bread and milk, let them sleep in real beds, and even found some clean clothes that mostly fit. She never asked about their past, but her gentle care spoke volumes. Benjamin flourished in the peaceful environment. He helped Mrs. Avery in her small garden, learning the names of different plants. At night, he whispered to Miriam, "I feel safe here, Mama, like nothing bad can touch us." But Miriam couldn't relax. She watched through windows, started at every distant sound, and slept with her axe close at hand. Mrs. Avery's kindness was a blessing, but experience had taught her that safety was always temporary. On the 3rd night, she overheard 2 of Mrs. Avery's neighbors talking as they passed the house. They mentioned increased patrols, dogs being brought in from other counties, and rewards being posted in every town. The hunt was intensifying. Miriam knew they had to move on. The longer they stayed, the more they risked bringing danger to this kind woman's door. She couldn't bear the thought of Mrs. Avery suffering for helping them. That evening, she told the children they would leave at first light. Esther cried quietly, and Benjamin's face fell, but neither argued. They understood too well the price of staying too long in one place. Mrs. Avery seemed to expect the news. She spent the night preparing a bundle of food and supplies: bread, dried meat, a small knife, matches wrapped in oilcloth, and a crude map drawn on a scrap of cloth. "Follow these markings," she explained, pointing to the map. "They'll lead you to other friends. Keep the river on your right, and watch for the signs we discussed." When dawn broke, they gathered by the back door. Mrs. Avery hugged each child, then pressed a small Bible into Miriam's hands. "There's money sewn into the cover," she whispered. "Not much, but enough to help if you find yourself in desperate need." "You've done too much already," Miriam protested, but Mrs. Avery shook her head. "What good is faith without works? Go with God, dear ones. I'll pray for your safe passage." Miriam thanked her with tears in her eyes, knowing words could never express her gratitude. She took her children's hands and led them into the misty morning woods. They had gone perhaps half a mile when they heard it. the faint but unmistakable sound of dogs barking in the distance. Miriam quickened their pace, guiding them deeper into the forest's shadows. The swamp grew thicker, choking out the sunlight with dense canopies of cypress and vine. Miriam's feet ached from days of walking, and even Benjamin had stopped trying to be brave. His small shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Esther hadn't spoken in hours, moving forward only because Miriam half-carried her. They pushed through a curtain of Spanish moss and suddenly found themselves facing the points of 3 spears. The weapons were held by men wearing mismatched clothes, part slave garments, part stolen finery. Their dark faces were streaked with mud for camouflage. "Who sent you?" the tallest demanded quietly. Miriam's hand tightened around her axe, but she forced herself to remain still. "Mrs. Avery. She gave us this." She slowly reached into her pocket and withdrew the brass token the ferryman had given her. The men examined it, then lowered their weapons. "Follow us," the leader said. "Mind where you step." They led the way through what appeared to be solid swamp, but was actually a hidden path marked by subtle signs. A bent reed here, a notched tree there. After several twisting turns, the path opened into a clearing that took Miriam's breath away. Platforms and walkways had been built in the trees, connected by rope bridges. Below, small gardens grew in raised beds safe from flooding. Smoke rose from carefully shielded cooking fires, and children darted between the structures like birds. It was a village, hidden in plain sight. "Welcome to freedom," the leader said, a hint of pride in his voice. "I'm Mateo. We've heard about you. The mother who burned down the Darnell plantation." Other people emerged from the shadows now, regarding them with cautious interest. A woman approached, carrying a pot of something that smelled wonderful. "These little ones need feeding," she said firmly. "Come, come, I'm Elmira." She led them to a cooking fire where several other children sat eating. "Here now, have some corn and stew." Benjamin and Esther fell on the food like they were starving, which Miriam supposed they nearly were. The corn was roasted to perfection, sweet and smoky, and the stew was rich with wild game and foraged vegetables. Esther actually smiled as she ate. The first real smile Miriam had seen since the auction. "Mama, look!" Benjamin pointed to where other children were playing a game with stones and sticks. "Can I?" "Go on," Miriam said softly, "but stay where I can see you." She watched as Benjamin approached the other children. They welcomed him easily, explaining their game. Soon he was laughing with them, the weight of their journey temporarily forgotten. Elmira sat beside Miriam, offering her a bowl of stew. "How long have you been running?" 2 weeks, maybe more." The days blur together. "You're safe here," Elmira said. "We've held this spot for 3 years. The swamp protects us. Slave catchers can't navigate it, and their dogs lose our scent in the water." As evening fell, more people gathered around the fires. Miriam counted at least 30 adults and a dozen children. They were a mix of runaways, free blacks who'd chosen to live apart from white society, and even a few white abolitionists who'd given up everything to help. An old man told stories while others played homemade instruments, a drum, a banjo pieced together from scrap wood, reed pipes that made haunting melodies. The music was kept quiet, but it filled the clearing with a sense of joy. Esther fell asleep in Miriam's lap, her face peaceful for the first time in weeks. Benjamin fought to stay awake, but eventually curled up beside them, his head resting against Miriam's knee. Mateo sat down nearby. "Your children seem happy here." "They do," Miriam agreed. "I haven't seen them so at peace since—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "They can have a life here," Mateo said gently. "We teach the children to read and write, to know their true worth. We grow our own food, make our own clothes. Sometimes we even help others escape. We know all the safe paths north." Miriam looked around the clearing. People were settling in for the night. Banking fires and climbing to their tree platforms, they moved with the ease of long practice, a community that had built something remarkable in this unlikely place. "How do you handle winter?" she asked. "We have warmer shelters built up high, and we store food all summer. It's not easy, but we survive." He smiled. "More than survive. We live free." The word free echoed in Miriam's heart. She looked down at her sleeping children, remembering how close she'd come to losing them forever. Here they could grow up without chains, without the constant fear of separation. Here they might even find joy again. As the last people drifted away from the fires, Miriam remained awake, watching her children sleep. Benjamin's face was relaxed, one hand curled protectively around his sister even in sleep. Esther's chest rose and fell steadily, her small body finally free of the trembling fear that had plagued her since the auction. Tears fell silently down Miriam's cheeks as she whispered a prayer into the night air. "Thank you, Lord, for bringing us here. Thank you for keeping my babies safe. Thank you for showing us that freedom isn't just a dream." The swamp sounds created a gentle lullaby. Frogs calling, night birds singing, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. For the first time since she'd watched her children dragged away, Miriam felt something like peace settle over her. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, in this hidden corner of the world, they were safe. Miriam jerked awake to screaming. For a moment, she thought she was back at the auction block, but then gunfire cracked through the night air. Orange light flickered against the trees, not cooking fires, but buildings burning. "Slave catchers!" the cry echoed across the camp. "They're coming from all sides!" Miriam lunged for Benjamin and Esther, still sleeping on their pallet. "Wake up! Now!" She shook them roughly, already grabbing their few possessions. Benjamin's eyes flew open, instantly alert. "Mama? Help your sister. We have to run." Miriam snatched up her axe as more gunshots split the darkness. Through the smoke, she saw Matteo organizing defenders. Some had rifles, others spears or machetes. Almira was hurrying children toward escape route, but a bullet caught her in the back. She fell without a sound. "This way!" Miriam grabbed her children's hands, pulling them toward the nearest platform ladder. Above, she could see flames spreading across the walkways. Someone had set fire to the rope bridges. A slave catcher burst through the smoke behind them, brass slave badge glinting on his chest. Miriam shoved Benjamin and Esther behind her, raising her axe. "Well, if it ain't the she-devil herself," the man sneered, leveling his pistol. "Worth more'n gold, you are." Before he could fire, a spear burst through his chest. Matteo yanked the weapon free as the slave catcher collapsed. "Run!" he shouted at Miriam. "Take the south path." She hesitated. "Matteo! Go! We'll hold them back." He turned to face more attackers emerging from the smoke. Miriam ran, half dragging her children. Gunfire and screams filled the air. Through gaps in the smoke, she saw other families fleeing, pursued by men with dogs. Some made it to the escape routes, others didn't. They reached the south path, but found it blocked by burning debris. Miriam spun around, searching for another way. The smoke was getting thicker, making Esther cough violently. "Mama, the water," Benjamin said, pointing to where the swamp lapped at the edge of the clearing. "Like before, when we hid from the dogs." Miriam nodded. It was their only chance. Hold hands. Don't let go, no matter what. They waded into the dark water, moving as quietly as possible. The mud sucked at their feet, threatening to trap them, but they pushed forward. When the water reached their chests, Miriam lifted Esther onto her back. Behind them, the camp was an inferno. The carefully built platforms collapsed in sheets of flame. Miriam heard Matteo shouting defiance. Then a final gunshot silenced him. "Keep moving," she whispered. "Don't look back." They pushed deeper into the swamp, past cypress knees and hanging moss. The water was cold, but Miriam barely felt it. Her whole world had narrowed to the weight of Esther on her back, and Benjamin's hand clutching hers. A dog's bark echoed across the water. Miriam froze, then slowly guided them behind a fallen tree. They crouched there, barely breathing, as voices approached. "The trail ends at the water," a man said. "Damn swamp'll hide 'em good." "Send the dogs in," another voice ordered. "In there? At night? Them gators'll eat 'em alive. Then we'll search at first light. Ain't no way they getting far in this muck." The voices moved away, but Miriam waited until she couldn't hear them at all before moving. They continued through the water, using cypress trees for support when the bottom dropped away. Something scaled brushed against Miriam's leg. A fish, she prayed, not a snake, or worse. Esther whimpered softly, but didn't cry out. Benjamin remained silent, though his hand trembled in hers. The sky began to lighten, turning the swamp from black to gray. They were far from the camp now, but smoke still stained the horizon. Miriam's legs felt like lead, and Esther's weight on her back was becoming unbearable. Finally, she spotted a low bank rising from the water. They crawled onto it, collapsing in the mud. Esther curled into a ball, shivering violently. Benjamin wrapped his arms around his sister, trying to warm her. Miriam stared back the way they'd come. The smoke had turned golden in the dawn light, beautiful and terrible. She thought of Almira's kindness, Mateo's sacrifice, the children who'd played with Benjamin, all gone in a single night of fire and blood. Their clothes were coated in mud and ash, their skin scratched by branches and reeds. They had nothing but what they carried, not even shoes, and the brief peace of the maroon camp felt like a dream that had shattered into nightmare. "Someone betrayed them," Miriam whispered, the realization bitter in her mouth. Someone had guided the slave catchers through the swamp's deadly maze. Someone who knew the camp's location and defenses. She looked at her trembling children and knew with crushing certainty that nowhere was truly safe. Not the plantation, not the widow's house, not even this hidden village that had seemed so perfect. They could never stop running, never trust completely, never let down their guard. The sun rose fully, turning the swamp waters to gold. In other circumstances, it might have been beautiful. But Miriam saw only danger in every shadow, every ripple, every bird call that might be a signal. The peace she'd felt just hours ago was gone, replaced by the familiar weight of fear and vigilance. Esther stirred, looking up at her with exhausted eyes. "Mama, where will we go now?" Miriam pulled her children close, feeling their hearts beat against her chest. She had no answer to give them, no promise of safety she could make. The swamp stretched endlessly around them, holding both refuge and threat in its murky depths. Moonlight filtered through the cypress trees, casting strange shadows on the swamp water. Miriam crouched behind a fallen log, listening intently. Voices drifted across the water, carried by the night breeze. "They'll have to cross at the river bend," a gruff voice said. "Only safe passage for miles." "What about the old ferry crossing?" another asked. "Collapsed last spring." "Nah, they'll come through here. That she-devil's got them kids with her. Can't risk the deep water." Miriam's hands tightened on her axe. They were right. She'd been planning to use that crossing. The hunters had them boxed in, waiting to spring their trap at dawn. Benjamin tugged at her sleeve. "Mama," he whispered, "I heard them too. They're gonna catch us." She turned to look at her son. In the dim light, his face seemed older somehow, marked by their weeks of running. Esther huddled against her other side, trembling slightly. "No," Miriam said softly. "They won't catch us. We're going to catch them first." Benjamin's eyes widened. "How?" "We'll set our own trap." Miriam studied the terrain around them. The swamp here was a maze of shallow pools and muddy islands, perfect for an ambush. "But I need to work fast, before the moon sets." I can help, Benjamin said firmly. I'm strong enough. Miriam started to refuse, but hesitated. They were beyond the luxury of keeping his hands clean, and she'd seen his quiet competence these past weeks, gathering wood, helping Esther through difficult terrain, keeping watch while she slept. All right, she said finally. I need stones, lots of them. Small enough to throw, big enough to make noise. Can you find them? Benjamin nodded seriously. I'll look by the creek bed. That's where the rocks wash up. Be careful. Silent as a shadow, remember? Like you taught me. He slipped away into the darkness, moving with a stealth that made her heart ache. No 8-year-old should need such skills. Esther clutched Miriam's skirt. Don't leave me, she whimpered. Never, Miriam promised, lifting her daughter onto her hip. You're staying right here with me. She began working methodically, Esther clinging to her like a second shadow. First, she dug shallow pits in the likely approach paths, covering them with branches and leaves. Anyone stepping there would sink knee-deep in mud, trapped. In the reeds near the water's edge, she scattered broken glass from a bottle she'd saved. The sharp edges would slice any dog's paws, forcing them to pull back their hounds. Benjamin returned periodically with stones, placing them in careful piles where she indicated. His small hands were scratched from searching in the dark, but he never complained. Good work, she whispered, squeezing his shoulder. Now help me with these reeds. Together, they gathered bundles of dry reeds, soaking them with lamp oil stolen from the widow's house. Miriam positioned them strategically. When lit, they would create a wall of fire, forcing the hunters toward her chosen killing ground. Why are you putting them there? Benjamin asked, watching her work. Because people are like water, Miriam explained softly. Block their path, and they flow where you want them to go. She showed him how to arrange branches to block certain routes, making others seem more appealing. Every step was calculated to funnel their pursuers into her trap. The moon crept lower as they worked. Miriam could hear the hunters moving into position, their voices carrying across the water. They were confident, relaxed. They thought their prey was helpless. 4 of them, Benjamin whispered, counting the torchlights. And 2 dogs. Good eyes, Miriam said. Her son was learning to see like prey, to count predators and track their movements, another skill he should never have needed. She positioned Esther in a hollow beneath a huge cypress root. Stay here, no matter what happens. Don't make a sound. Benjamin will be right here with you. But I can still help, Benjamin protested. You are helping, Miriam said firmly. You're protecting your sister. That's the most important job of all. He nodded reluctantly, settling beside Esther in their hiding place. Miriam covered them with Spanish moss, making them nearly invisible in the darkness. The hunters were closer now. Miriam could smell tobacco smoke, hear the soft splash of their boots in the water. Their torches cast dancing shadows through the trees. Spread out, the leader ordered. Watch for tracks leading to the crossing. Miriam moved silently to her chosen position, axe ready in her hands. The weight felt familiar now, almost comfortable. She thought of Elmira falling to a bullet, of Mateo buying their escape with his life. The axe seemed to pulse with those memories, eager for blood. The dogs were leading the hunters forward, noses working the air. They would catch her scent soon, but by then it would be too late. The trap was set. One hunter passed close to her position, torch held high. In its light, she saw the brass slave catcher's badge on his chest, like the one who died in the camp. These men made their living hunting people, trading in human misery. They would sell her children back into bondage without a moment's hesitation. The thought hardened something inside her. These weren't men, not really. They were just obstacles between her children and freedom. Obstacles that needed to be removed. From her hiding place, Miriam could see Benjamin and Esther's hollow. Her son's eyes gleamed in the darkness, watching everything. He would witness what came next. There was no helping that. But perhaps it was a necessary lesson. Sometimes survival required terrible things. The hunters moved closer, torches bobbing like fireflies through the swamp. Miriam gripped her axe tighter, crouching low in the shadows. The trap was ready. The hunters would never expect their prey to turn predator. She waited, silent and deadly, for the right moment to strike. The first hunter stumbled into one of Miriam's hidden pits with a startled cry. Mud closed around his legs like hungry hands, trapping him waist-deep. His torch fell, igniting the oil-soaked reeds. Fire raced through the swamp in a bright line, exactly as she had planned. "It's a trap!" he shouted, struggling in the muck. "She's here!" The dogs lunged forward but yelped in pain as glass shards sliced their paws. They retreated, whimpering, leaving their masters to face the darkness alone. Miriam moved like a shadow through the smoke. The trapped hunter was still fighting the mud when her axe found his neck. His scream died in a wet gurgle. "Tom? Where are you?" Another hunter called out, panic edging his voice. Miriam melted back into the darkness. The fire had split the hunters, forcing them along her chosen paths. She could hear them splashing through the water, cursing as smoke stung their eyes. A stone arced through the air, Benjamin's contribution, and splashed loudly to her left. Two hunters turned toward the sound, raising their rifles. "There! By the water!" They fired blindly into the reeds. Miriam circled behind them, feet finding solid ground in the treacherous muck. These men didn't know the swamp like she did. Every step might sink them. Every patch of firm ground might be quicksand in disguise. The second hunter died, never seeing her coming. Her axe caught him between the shoulders, and he fell face first into the black water. The third spun at the sound, but his boot caught in a root. As he stumbled, Miriam's axe found his chest. Only the leader remained. She could hear him thrashing through the swamp, all pretense of stealth abandoned. "Come out, you devil woman!" he shouted. "We'll find those brats of yours. You can't hide forever." Miriam's grip tightened on her axe. This man's voice. She recognized it from the auction block. He'd been there when her children were sold, probably taking a cut of the profit. She ghosted through the smoke, letting him catch glimpses of her movement. Each time he turned to fire, she was already gone. His shots echoed uselessly through the cypress trees. "Show yourself!" His voice cracked with fear now. Good. Let him know how it felt to be hunted. Miriam drove him steadily toward the deepest part of the swamp, where black water concealed bottomless mud. He was breathing hard, turning in circles, torch held high. A stone splashed behind him. As he spun to face it, his foot found empty air instead of solid ground. With a cry of terror, he plunged into the mire. Miriam emerged from the shadows, watching as he thrashed in the deep mud. His eyes went wide with recognition. "Please," he gasped, sinking steadily. "Help me. I'll let you go, I swear it." "Like you helped me?" Miriam's voice was cold. "When I begged for my children?" The mud reached his chest now. His torch sputtered and died, leaving only moonlight to illuminate his terror. "You can't just let me die." "Watch me." She stood silent as the mire took him. His last scream bubbled into silence as the swamp swallowed him whole. Dawn was breaking when Miriam returned to her children's hiding place. Benjamin and Esther emerged from beneath the cypress root, faces smudged with dirt, but unharmed. "Are they gone?" Benjamin asked quietly. "They're gone," Miriam confirmed. "All of them." She gathered them close, breathing in their familiar scents beneath the smoke and mud. They were alive. They were together. Nothing else mattered. They walked until midday, following the directions Matthias had given her. The token he'd provided, a simple brass disc with a cross scratched into it, felt heavy in her pocket. The farmhouse looked ordinary enough, but Miriam recognized the signs she'd been told to watch for. 3 chairs on the porch, a blue cloth hanging from the window. An elderly couple answered her knock. The woman gasped at their appearance, but the man simply held out his hand for Matthias's token. "Come inside quickly," he said after examining it. "You'll be safe here." They were fed, cleaned, and given fresh clothes. The couple, Mr. and Mrs. Parker, were part of the Underground Railroad. They had a wagon with a false bottom, used for smuggling fugitives across the border. "We'll leave at sunset," Mr. Parker explained. "The border's just 4 hours north. Once you cross it, you'll be in free soil." Miriam hardly dared believe it. After weeks of running, of fighting, of killing, could freedom really be so close? The journey passed in tense silence. Every approaching horseman made them hold their breath. Every checkpoint caused their hearts to race. But Mr. Parker's papers were in order, and no one thought to search his wagon too carefully. Shortly after midnight, they crossed the border. Miriam felt no immediate change, saw no visible line between slave soil and free, but something in the air seemed lighter, as if an invisible weight had lifted from her shoulders. The safe house was a small cabin on the outskirts of a Quaker settlement. Inside, real beds waited, clean, soft, with fresh linens and warm quilts. Benjamin and Esther could barely keep their eyes open as Miriam helped them wash and change into clean nightclothes. They fell asleep almost instantly when she tucked them into bed. Miriam stood watching them in the gray pre-dawn light. They looked so peaceful, so innocent, as if the horrors of the past weeks had been nothing but a nightmare. But the weight of the axe still lingered in her hands. The memory of blood and smoke would never fully fade. She had killed to win this moment, had become something dark and terrible to ensure her children would sleep in freedom. Touching their faces gently, she whispered, "You are free now." The words felt strange on her tongue, almost foreign after a lifetime of bondage. The first rays of dawn crept through the window, warming her scarred face. In that light, she was both victor and victim, savior and monster, mother and murderer. But her children were safe. They were free. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.